My name is Gary Steeley, and I'm going to be talking today about moving services to the cloud, which is, we've all been dealing with the cloud for quite a while now. Well, it seems like a while, but I mean, Azure has been around, what, 6, 7 years now? No, maybe closer to 10. And a lot of this stuff is fairly new, but that's, what we're doing now is moving stuff to the cloud. What we're going to be focusing more on today is moving legacy stuff up to the cloud, because if you're like me, now my default is I pretty much want to move stuff, if any new service, I want to have that in the cloud for various reasons. But you've got all this stuff that's running in the network. How do we get it up to the cloud? What do we gain? What do we lose? How do we make the arguments? Because as we all know, some of this stuff can be very expensive. So, there's all sorts of different types of clouds. Public, Amazon, Microsoft, private, something you build, hybrid, a combination of the two, community cloud. A bunch of us, local governments come together, we create our own cloud. That would be a community cloud. All this really means, though, is, there's data centers and servers. I mean, that's all the cloud really means. So you're running your stuff on somebody else's server room. The more important thing you need to look at is, what are you going to be running on it? What types of services? And so, back up on this one. You start off with infrastructure as a services, and you've got various providers. And here you're really talking about, the full infrastructure. Servers, firewalls, load balancers. I mean, you're really talking about full-blown a server room. With all the granularity that would give you, either you're managing or somebody else is managing it for you. Then the next level down might be something like platform as a service, where you're just running web services, or you've got a database up in the cloud. You're not really dealing with the operating system per se. You're just running something, a program on a platform. And then you go down to, Google Apps. There's a bunch of, various different services like that. And then you get software as a service, which is, Gmail, Google Docs. And there you've got, very little control over. You can't really get to the back end of any of that stuff. You're just, there's the application. It's running on a shared instance. So, I mean, you can look at this and you can see there's a whole spectrum of things you can do. I mean, you can do something as simple as, Google Docs, where you're really not managing a lot of it, all the way up to something like infrastructure as a service, where you have servers, you've got VMs, you've got your domain controllers in the cloud, and, in between. So, and you may be managing it, or a vendor may be managing it for you. So you go from simple, which is software as a service, to complex with infrastructure as a service, and that also, price is the same thing. Pretty much software as a service usually is fairly, is going to be a lot cheaper than, say, infrastructure as a service. Where you fit on this will just often depend on the functionality that you need out of your application. And you always start with what you want to do before you figure out, how you want to host it. Because it doesn't make any sense to say, I want to do software as a service, and it doesn't provide the functionality that you want. And there's also all sorts of other services: storage, security, data as a service, test environment as a service, so on and so forth. You can even get malware as a service on the darknet, so you can go out and create your own ransomware and select your botnets, and they'll push it out for you, and and they'll route the bitcoins back to you. So, I mean, service, that's the way. The cloud's the way to go on this stuff. So, I mean, as we go, I'm going to be looking at some different examples as we go through this, and we'll kind of fit this into the structure here. This is just something that, this is just something I pulled off of Microsoft Azure. I mean, but you've got, this is just a web app, but you've got web VMs, you've got SQL servers, you've got this is just like a regular server room. This, you know, you can picture this running on a Hyper-V host on in your server room, and also you've got your on-premises system connecting back, authentication, whatever. You can add, and if you look at Microsoft Azure or Amazon or any of these, and you start looking at the functionality, I think they've got like 70 different things, 70 different services, features that you can do. You can basically put together any sort of infrastructure that you wanted in any of these services. The question being, would you want to, one, and two, could you afford to? And that's kind of what we're going to be looking at. Well, what makes sense to move to the cloud, and how do you make those different arguments? So why do you move to the cloud? A lot of people do it for reliability or resilience. You run it in a hosted environment. It's in multiple data centers. You've got replication going on. Your building goes down. People can still access services. If you're on the coast, for instance, it would make sense to, something like this would make a lot of sense. If you lose your building, you're still up and running. So resilience, and that's one of the reasons why we use it, is because we just basically got one location. If the building goes down, I don't have, we're out of business. So it gives us, the organization, a lot of resiliency. Security, there's a couple of issues here. One is, I'm a big believer, all public-facing stuff needs to be out in the cloud. I don't like running that stuff internally, mainly because by running it in the cloud, I can then harden my perimeter. I can be much more strict on my firewall. And the other piece of it, as a small shop, because we are a small shop, I got about 100 and so users, is I just don't have the expertise. And this stuff is, really complicated. And I have a lot more faith that Microsoft can do better security than I can. They've probably got a couple more people in my shop. So, that's security, particularly on a small shop, is a big seller for me. Obviously, disaster recovery is a major issue. And where your DR sites are, we don't have other locations right now. So, one option would be to move it out to the cloud. And the whole idea of a mobile, flexible organization. The nice thing about moving stuff to the cloud is, Office 365 or Voice over IP or whatever is, it's just so much easier to connect. Your users can connect to it anywhere, as opposed to trying to route stuff through firewalls, which can be a major pain. Users have their devices and they want to be able to use them everywhere. And the cloud just makes that a lot easier. And it makes it more secure, though, because you're actually doing it in a hosted, in a secure environment in the cloud. So, plus it allows you, if you want to spin stuff up real quickly, or bring new services online, I find it's a lot quicker, for the hosted solution versus doing it in-house. So it gives you the flexibility, the responsiveness that you're going to need. The lack of expertise. For a small shop, like I said, I just don't have the expertise to do all this. I don't have the time, I don't have the expertise. The other piece of that is, if I'm maintaining legacy equipment, I'm not working on new equipment or new projects. And that's a big issue. It's called technology debt. And if you spend more than 50% of your time working on old equipment, you're not moving forward as an organization. So the more you can push off to the cloud, to the vendors, the more time you have to concentrate on what's value, adds value to the organization. All right, so this gets kind of hard on this. A lot of this stuff, return on investment. You've got to make the case. How much is it going to cost? Is it worthwhile? Now, our default right now is on new stuff. If it meets our requirements, is in the cloud, and those are easier arguments to make, because you're not because typically if you're migrating an existing service, you're looking at cost to upgrade versus cost to move it to the cloud. And those numbers often don't work out very well. But when it's a new service and you're moving it to the cloud, you're not making that comparison, and it's just an easier argument to make. You know, Office 365 on a dollar, you know, just per dollar, when you move on premises out to the cloud, it cost us more. But we gained a lot from it. So you've really got to couch your arguments. You know, so you've got this whole idea of quantifiable versus non-quantifiable. And, you know, quantifiable, you know, hardware costs, software costs, utilities, whatever. Remember, you know, when we were first dealing with virtualization, and we were dealing with the same stuff, it was easy to make this argument. We're going to take 20 physical servers and move them onto one physical host. The rate of return on investment on that's really obvious. You're saving lots of money. Your server room is going to get smaller, so on and so forth. What's your return on investment when you move a virtualized application to the cloud? Well, what are you saving? Now, in my case, a few things came in alignment. I was running Exchange 2010 on premises. I had a Hyper-V cluster, you know, a SAN, all that good stuff. Everything was coming off of warranty. Okay, so when you start doing your balance sheet, I said, if I move this stuff to the cloud, I can go to a simpler infrastructure. I can avoid this amount of money in hardware costs. And I was able to make the argument, even though it costs more, you know, looking at the numbers, you know, those are the type of, the argument I can make is because I didn't have to upgrade my equipment. I was able to use that money and apply it towards the cloud service. So you have to be, you know, you have to look at those numbers, and you have to be, not say creative, but you've got to find those costs. But it's hard. I mean, it really can be hard, particularly if you're moving virtualized applications, because, I mean, once you move that app, the host, you know, you're not getting rid of the host server. I mean, you know, so it's just, this can be hard when you're moving legacy apps. So then you start looking at some of your non-quantifiable, which I've already talked about it. You know, Office 365 for us is, I mean, the big selling point was the flexibility of it all. I mean, the collaborative tools, those sort of things, those are the things that we were looking for that gave us a lot of value. It could be that as you move to the cloud, you get additional features. You know, you have to start looking at that stuff and start couching your argument. The problem, of course, is you're always going to run into, you know, that one council person who's always going to look at the numbers. And I don't know how you get around that, you know, I mean, but like I said, this is going to be, and some stuff you're just going to look at, and you're going to look at the numbers, and I've got some examples we'll get to where you just kind of scratch your head and say, boy, it would really be nice to do this, but the numbers just don't work out. So this is a hard part to do, but you really got to look at it, because obviously you're going to have to justify it. Some things are easy to justify. We've got all our email infrastructure out in the cloud, and that was fairly easy to do. Other stuff, not so much. You know, it gets questionable at some point. So we're making the argument, you know, we have to make you got to make the argument, you know, and you've got to couch numbers, but you've got to look at big picture. You've got to show how this is going to advance the organization. And this is a good part of it, is particularly, I mean, the public wants to interact with government the way that they interact with business, which is, I mean, they want to do it online. And they want to have, you know, very quick, you know, they want new features and so on and so forth. That stuff is a lot easier to develop and to do in the cloud than to do that in-house. So a lot of that stuff, it would make sense to do that. I always tie everything, any argument that I make for any hardware or software, I'll always tie it to our mission statement and the goals of the department. You always got to tie it into that. You know, you got to demonstrate that it meets your goals. Now you got to understand the costs of migration. There may be training costs involved. You got to keep that in mind. New skills, and this is, you're moving stuff out to the cloud. What new skills are required. What you'll find is at some point you're not managing technology, you're managing vendor relations, and that's a different skill set. You've got someone who's really good at nuts and bolts, who's happy in the server room. Can that person troubleshoot a very, working with, tier 3 technical support in Microsoft? Does that person have the skills to work through a problem like that? I mean, that's a different skill set. So I mean, it's I don't know how you deal with that, but I mean, just keep that in mind. Things change, and your relationship in technology, you're at to a certain extent, at arm's length from the technology. You're going through other people to get to your technology sometimes. Do you have the skills to manage those relationships? Because if you don't, then things go south really quickly. Just one thing you got to keep in mind is you got to show how you'll manage costs, because we get spoiled with virtualization. You need a server, you just spin it up. Well, you can do the same thing up in the cloud if you want to, but you're paying for everything up there depending on what model you're using. I mean, depending on what model you're using, you're being metered on the CPU cycles, on the RAM, the storage, the bandwidth. Everything is metered, but depending on what model you use, and that stuff can get out of control really quickly if you don't have processes in place. Who can start new processes? Who can start new VMs? How do you monitor the stuff? I mean, you can very easily bust a budget on this. So as you move stuff out in the cloud, you've got to make sure you have policies in place that you can manage it and monitor it. All right, a couple more things to consider. We're government. Stuff needs to stay in certain places. It's got to stay in the U.S. You need to pin that down. Data centers need to be in particular locations. So if you're Office 365, you use the government cloud. Government cloud is, the data centers are in the United States. Okay. Going to look at security requirements, HIPAA, public safety. All right, you're in the government cloud for Office 365. They're HIPAA compliant. Okay. The government cloud is separate. The servers are separated from the public cloud. The staff has special clearances. Whenever you're looking at stuff like HIPAA, anyone who is HIPAA compliant should be able to sign a what they call business partner agreement. If you can't get a business partner agreement from a vendor in the cloud, then they're probably not HIPAA compliant. So that's the sort of things you got to look at. Look at whoever, if you're being monitored by outside agencies or whatever, you need to look and see what their requirements are. Obviously, criminal justice has very strict requirements. Pay a lot of attention to that. It'll bite you in the butt. I mean, that's everything. Back up to the cloud, whatever. I mean, you've got to, wherever your data lies, if it's sensitive information and it's got to meet HIPAA requirements, you really need to pin that stuff down, and you need to have the paperwork, because bad things might happen.
Gary, I'd also add that you can't find something that's going to make you HIPAA compliant either, right?
Yeah.
Procedures compliant.
Yeah.
So, something can either enable or block your compliance, but it's still up to you all in that last mile to make sure you're dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
Oh yeah, I mean it always comes down to it's your head on the block on this one. A simple one. How do you get your data up to the cloud? I mean, we've all worked with big data before. I mean, you're moving terabytes around. It can be, I mean, if you're moving terabytes up to the cloud on a small pipe, it'll take you a while. So, something to keep in mind if you're dealing with huge amounts of data, just not a big deal. I mean, I guess Google actually has a semi-truck, which is one big storage device, which has, it's like, huge amounts of storage. They'll drive this truck up to your building and download all your data for you. So, how do you get your data back? All right, you always, you know, I've been married 25 years, so I can say this, but okay, you know, you often go into a relationship, you know, you know, prepared for the worst. All right, so all right, say you got all your stuff up in the cloud, the data, and you know your users, and you know the vendor has it, and all of a sudden you want to break the contract expired, and you need to get everything back down off the cloud. Better make sure you have ownership of it, you have the rights to it, you can get it back down. Just, you know, it's small things like that that you gotta watch out for. Backups and restores. You gotta pay attention to what. All right, so you've got something up in the cloud. How are they backing it up? How do you do the restores on it? You know, what are the windows of opportunity on it? I mean, so just, it's the simple stuff like that. Just because your information's up in the cloud, I mean, certain things are the same in terms of protecting the integrity of your data. You got to make sure, if you're not doing it, you got to make sure that they're doing it. All right, so we're going to go through some examples of what I've done over the years, trying to make life easier for myself. And the first thing we did was email infrastructure. So we moved, first thing I moved up, we've always used Barracuda for years. So and we had an appliance on house. I'm on-prem. I moved up to the web cloud-based security in 2014 because when New Orleans moved into Office 365, so I wanted, it made sense to me if I'm moving email up to the cloud, I need to move my security up to the cloud. But we've also had on-prem listservs, so I needed to have something that can get, you know, screen email coming onto my premises. I mean, if I hadn't had the listservs, I would probably have just gone with the Microsoft web security because it's a good product. But I went with a different product just because of the listservs. And so, but one of the reasons I wanted to move stuff out of the cloud is, you know, you've got this security ecosystem. You know, you look at Barracuda, Microsoft, all of them. I mean, they're pulling live data from all their devices from everywhere, and it's all going into threat databases, and that's being used real time to evaluate the traffic that's coming, you know, into to the system, and that's a really, you know, it's a really powerful tool. And then you've got newer technologies like advanced threat protection. I use that, also known as sandboxing, which is where an attachment comes in, it goes through the scanning, it still looks suspicious. They will run it in a virtual environment and see how it behaves and determine whether it's safe or not. You know, stuff like that takes a lot of resources. You really can't do that on-prem. You know, that really needs to be out in the cloud. So Barracuda has it, Microsoft has it. I mean, highly recommend sandboxing. And then you look down the road, artificial intelligence is coming along, and you know, artificial intelligence is going to be a great tool for security. But once again, you're not going to have the firepower to run that stuff on local premises. So for me, it just makes sense that email security, the place for that's in the cloud. So, and it has the same. It had the same features. I mean, it's, you know, the spam filtering, the antivirus, attachment sandboxing, URL. You know, an email comes through. It will rewrite the URL. If there's a link in the email, it will rewrite the URL so that when you click on it, it goes through the Barracuda, all the different databases before you can get to the site. So every link is link protected, and that's a feature that a lot of providers will have. Typo squatting, which is a pretty cool one, is, you know how where they will a malware writer will do a misspelling on a typical URL. Well, they got a database, and if it detects a misspelling, it will correct it and take you to the right one. So I mean, that's, you know, features like that. You can do a lot of stuff with that. The nice thing about the cloud-based stuff is they're keeping adding stuff all the time. And the nice thing about anything that's cloud-based is you know, it's just there. You know, you get this new feature and it just pops up. I mean, it makes life a lot easier. Except for sometimes when you go into Office 365 and the admin console's different, you know, and then you scratch your head. But I mean, you know, I mean, that's just the price of progress. So then the next thing we did is Office 365, and we were running 2010 in-house. Didn't have any problems. You know, it was a Hyper-V cluster on SAN, but there was reasons why I wanted to get rid of it. Wanted to evade the upgrade cost, and that included the cost of replacing all the hardware. I mean, you know, a lot of the money for the SAN, for instance, was one-time money we got from the feds. Workforce stimulus. I mean, so there was just, you know, I mean, and a SAN, you know, costs you a few bucks. So I wanted to simplify my network, so we decided, let's move the email to the cloud. Simplify the network. I mean, I moved, what I moved to is Hyper-V replication. It's just local servers, local storage, Hyper-V replication back and forward. All the, you know, and moving apps out to the cloud. That's how I want to be. I don't want to have more points of failure in my network. I want less. And server talking to server is really, you know, basic technology. It's Microsoft talking to Microsoft. So that's how I'm moving my network is towards. And this one, I didn't tell the boss this, but you know, running an email server, it's just, I mean, there's a lot of pressure because, you know, everyone knows as soon as the email server goes down, you know, so if it's, yeah, it runs, and it never did go down, but you're always waiting for it to go down. So I'll just tell you right now that it really surprised me just how much weight came off the shoulders when that went out to the cloud. Office 365 has been reliable. I mean, we've had like maybe 90 minutes of issues, one instance for 90 minutes over 3.5 years. But it's nice being able to say, hey, it's not my fault, it's Microsoft's fault. So, I mean, you know what I mean? So, I'm just telling you, I mean, don't tell the boss that, but, you know, for your internal motivation, the more stuff you put out in the cloud, I mean, it does make your life easier in a lot of ways. Arguments to management. Okay, all right, so it was more expensive than upgrading. I mean, the numbers were close. So we looked at the cost avoidance. That was the whole issue about, you know, hardware and stuff. One of the things we did is a lot of people, you know, we leveraged our existing Office licenses. Now, a lot of people, when they're pricing this stuff, they'll look at, you know, all right, I need, you know, G3 licenses, which is the downloadable, you know, when you get the whole full thing with Office 2016 now. But we had a crap load of Office 2013 licenses from an EA. You know, we didn't need Office. So we went with G1s and used our existing licenses. We got a 3-year contract, the thought being, you know, for 3 years I'll stay with 2013. That brought the prices down. If you've got 30% of your users are running Office 2010, well then 30% of your licenses can be G3s, the rest can be G1s. You can upgrade during the course of your contract from a G1 to a G3 or whatever. You can't downgrade though. But take a look at that. You may not, you may be thinking that you need a G3, but you may not. If you've got enough Office licenses in-house. So we looked at that, and that really changed a lot of the numbers.
So Jerry, just a point on that, just from the way that things work, is there's some particulars in regards to your enterprise agreement that made what you said accurate.
Yeah.
But if it's pure cloud licensing, you can add it or subtract it, upgrade it or downgrade it with 60 days notice to your resale.
Okay, that was
each anniversary.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, and then things changed. When I was told I couldn't downgrade it, but that was, you know, and things change. What you'll find is that things will change. So
that's because of what was on your agreement already. So just get with your Microsoft rep.
Okay. The other thing we made is, all right, we're a regional council. We work with a lot of local governments. We work with a lot of outside agencies. There's a lot of different valuable tools that we can use. SharePoint, OneDrive, so on and so forth. And so that was an argument we made. And plus, you know, the cost to make those services, and give IT staff more time for valuable. So our experience is, all right, we used Liftoff. We did a cutover on Friday, changed the profiles over the weekend. everyone came in on Monday, it was smooth. I mean, it was just a very smooth transition, because we were still using Outlook, so I mean, it was one of the better experiences I've ever had. You know, it was one of those things where you expect the worst. Well, you know, it didn't. You know, some things actually come true. We found, we didn't really plan for this, but we got the licenses for the encryption. We find the encryption is incredibly valuable. So we got rules set up, because you got a lot of flexibility on this, so I got a rule set up. If you type the word confidential in the subject matter, it's encrypted. If outgoing email has sensitive information like social security numbers, it automatically is encrypted. And then I get an email so I can go yell at them for, you know, sending out unencrypted email. If we got emails that are going to our insurance or our drug testing company, they're automatically encrypted. I mean, you've got a lot of flexibility, you've got a lot of rules you can do, yes?
You doing that through Barracuda?
No, I'm doing it through Office 365. It's rules within Office 365. But there's an add-on license for that. It's not rights management license. So, yeah, Barracuda do the same thing. I mean, it's different way. I mean, I just did it with 365. It works, you know, it works really well. It's
That's part of your G3 license when you step up to those. So
yeah. Yeah, OneDrive was, we used OneDrive a lot. We got rid of FTP sites, all that stuff. It's great for sharing stuff. SharePoint took longer to be adapted because you can do stuff out of the box, but like everything else, at a certain point, if you really want to make it a great tool, you've got to do more to it. You know, it's a platform, not an application, okay? I mean, so if you're looking at SharePoint and you really want to leverage SharePoint, you're really going to have to, that's going to be additional resources. You're going to have to, and planning, and it's like putting the website together like what we're doing right now. So it's going to take 3 times longer than what you think it's going to take. So, but just keep that in mind. But just out of the box, you can actually get a basic team site up and running pretty quickly, and it's usable. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at, email backup. Email, I mean, Office 365 does, they do retention and stuff like that, but they don't do backup like we do. You think of doing backups. I want to restore a mailbox from 6 months ago. They will store data for 30 days. I think you can keep, they'll retain information for 30 days and then it's gone. So, you need to look at how you're going to do your backup on some, particularly if you're using SharePoint and you're using OneDrive and you've got work documents out there. I mean, that's work product, you've got to back it up. So what we did is we added Barracuda Cloud to Cloud in 2016. So then it is what it says. It's just a connector from Office 365 to Barracuda Cloud. You go in through a browser and you just back up and you restore like you normally would any other backup software. Incredibly, and I've done it before, and the restore times are pretty good on it. So you really have to. This is a cost you may not be thinking about when you're doing Office 365 migration, but you need to look at it because and there's other there's other vendors that do this. Obviously, I guess having to be a big Barracuda shop. So and that's what we back up because we tell users, all right, if you're putting stuff on OneDrive, copy it from your PC. If it's on the PC, it's backed up. Well, but what happens is you put it out on SharePoint or on OneDrive, and you've got outside agencies working on it. There's no guarantee that the latest version is going to be down on the network. So you need to back stuff up in the cloud. Email archiving. All right, guess who I'm using for email archiving? I've got an in-house Barracuda, and I've used that for, this is my 4th year on this one. So you can archive from the cloud to on-prem. And then, once the hardware expires, we're just going to migrate that to the cloud. You can use the Office 365 does have a good archiving feature too. It's just that we had years worth of stuff already in our Barracuda archiver, and for me, it was just easier just to keep with Barracuda. So once we get this up in the cloud, then my entire email infrastructure will be in the cloud. And none of this was complicated, and I didn't have any argument with management because this all made a lot of sense to do it this way. All right, so backups. Now, I run Barracuda. Okay, so I got an appliance in the server room, and then we're replicating the backups to the cloud. You can't do, in my opinion, you can't do backups directly to the cloud, because the issue is you got to do restores from the cloud. I mean, it's hard enough doing a restore on a huge server on the LAN. Can you imagine trying to pull that off the internet? I mean, so just from practical point of view, you really need to, my opinion, for what it's worth, I mean, you really need to have your local backup, and a local backup which you can do a local restore. But what this enables me to do is I can keep recent stuff on the appliance in the server room, but then my monthlies and my yearlies, all that stuff just goes out in the cloud. I've got unlimited storage for Barracuda, so that allows you to keep your older stuff out in the cloud, your newer stuff on the appliance, if you need to do a restore. So the two, work hand in hand there. That way I didn't have to go upsize my box when I sized my Barracuda. I was able to use the cloud for that. So that works really well. Now we've got a few laptops that are floating around. So I could have probably figured out how to get into Barracuda, but I just bought a Carbonite business license. It's like $250 for unlimited number of computers, and that's just cloud-based. So I got about maybe 8 or 9 or 10 laptops that are floating around. So I use Carbonite for that. I use that at home as well. It's a really good product, and those other products work well. So just be careful if you're using commercial stuff like that. There's no sensitive information. This stuff is just because I highly doubt that Carbonite, that model is HIPAA compliant, but none of the stuff, the laptops we're backing up don't have that type of information. So that's a safe bet.
So Gary, just out of curiosity, what are you backing up on the client devices?
PCs?
Yeah, as far as, like you have a gold image to restore that.
No, we don't have a gold. I mean, we do. Well, see, we do. I mean, I'm not backing up the PCs because we do folder redirection. So I'm just backing up the servers. If a PC blows up, they log on to another computer. All the stuff is there.
Right.
So I mean, that's
laptops then, I guess.
Yeah, that's just files. I'm not backing up. I mean, that stuff there is not there. I'll just rebuild the laptop. I'm not doing images off of that. So yeah.
Gary, you said folder redirection kind of sparked something. You guys looking into doing folder redirection to it, like a SharePoint document repository or something?
We haven't got to that point yet, and I don't really want to go that way. Yeah. No, I mean, I just SharePoint just seems like this black pit. Every time I get involved in SharePoint, it takes forever. So, so just I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. I mean.
Or even OneDrive.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that point yet, mainly because a lot of our departments are they're silos. So I mean, it's just the way we're organized, and we report to our different departments report to outside agencies. So it doesn't work well for us to do a central repository in that sense. So within each department, though, oftentimes we put SharePoint together. So factors to consider on this. I mean, bandwidth is a huge issue when you're doing backups. Dedupe is going to be key on that. Restore times just, they're going to kill you if you're restoring off the cloud. I mean, so you need to have some policies in place. I mean, that's what Barracuda has this interest. They've got a feature where if you're backing up VMs to the cloud, you can actually spin up a Hyper-V or VMware in their backup cloud. Then it's just you have a network connector that you would install on the computer, and you can get to the VM. I haven't really played with that. My goal is more just to move everything to a hosted solution, and the users are always connecting to the cloud anyway. So, all right, I'm gonna have to go quicker on some of the stuff. I mean, we were looking at Laserfiche. Who uses Laserfiche here? Alright, so we were looking at the Laserfiche cloud, web-based using browser, and you know, whenever I see web-based, alarm bells goes off, because it's been my experience that the thick client always gives a more richer experience. Not always, but you know, you gotta look into it. The other issue we find with web-based is every time you update your browser, you know, you're fixing stuff. So, and we're very aggressive in updating our browsers. So, also we were looking at vendor hosted. So, and what they do is, we're going through one source, they're managing it, but they spin up VMs in Amazon, okay? So it's basically the same thing you'd be running on-prem. The exact same software managed the same way. So you get the same functionality. You have the ability to use thick clients here. So you're just, it's to be an SSL connection to what's ever running in the cloud. Same functionality, no training issues.
So during that, the thick clients are still running on
The PC.
devices, not in VDI.
No, yeah, this is just connecting out. But you can also connect through the browser on that, because Laserfiche has web-based access as well. The nice thing about this, though, is you got to look at is, if you want to integrate with third-party apps, something like software as a service, you're not going to be able to do that because you can't get to the back end of it. So you really need to look at something as, infrastructure as a service, or somewhere where you can actually get into the server, or the vendor gets into the server and does the integration. Third-party integration, if you're looking at integrating software into an application, it really matters what platform it is, and how that's done. So you've really got to look very closely at that. Bring your own licenses. All right, the way this is to work is, if you've got Laserfiche, all right, you're still paying support to Laserfiche. One source will do the updates and everything for you. And then in addition to that, you pay one source for the hosting charge. So this is an instance where it's going to cost us more, because you're not saving on support if we did with one source, and you're also paying for the hosting fee. But there are good reasons for us to do this. The other thing is, I forgot to mention it, is the web-based one has a much simpler workflow. We got a really complicated workflow. Can't run it on the Laserfiche cloud, though apparently Laserfiche is now going to be updating that, so that may, at some point, you'll have the same functionality in the cloud as you would on-prem Laserfiche, but they're not there yet. So if you want to do the same functionality in the cloud, you're going to have to go with a hosted solution like OneSource. All right, so the next one is financial. We're going to move our financials out to the cloud, and it's kind of the same options. We can do with Abila, that's the vendor. It's just software as a service, web-based. You log in, it's like Office 365, and you do your stuff, okay? I don't like web-based, mentioned that, and particularly in finance apps. Finance apps are really complicated. And I just don't see, we don't see the same level of functionality that I would in a thick client. Plus, finance people just don't like changing stuff. They just don't. So, now their model is, and you don't want to piss off finance because they're the ones with money. So, yeah, so, oh boy, yeah, it's like NT4 or whatever, so, no, I got rid of that a couple days ago. So, their model is, there's a vendor, there's a company down in Florida, and they specialize in hosting this stuff. And what they do is they've just bought rack space in various data centers up and down the East Coast, and they run Hyper-V clusters in these data centers. And within that, you have your own VM running your software. So that's a good model. But this will allow us, it's the same functionality. We can use a thick client if you need to. Once again, it's bring your own licenses. So we're still paying licenses to Abila, and then we're paying the costs for the hosting. So Laserfiche will probably move to the cloud. This we're definitely going to move to the cloud. It costs a bit more, but finance wants to have the flexibility of working from anywhere, and they always manage to find the money for their stuff. So that's going to happen. Okay. So now this one, we're a Mitel voice over IP shop. So we got a 3300, and we bought all these phones back in 2009. And in 2013, we virtualized all our software. So all my gateway and all that stuff, my ESNA voicemail, it's all running on VMware. And then we just use the 3300 as a gateway for the PRI. It's all getting old. I need to upgrade the VM host software. I mean the VM host server. I need to upgrade the software. So we're looking at hosted versus upgrading, because a lot of people are going to hosted voice over IP. If I was doing a brand new system right now, there'd be no question in my mind I would go with a hosted voice over IP. I think Wake County is just started implementing their hosted voice over IP, so they got 1,300 users. They'll have 1,300 users on a hosted voice over IP system. So I mean, I think moving forward, that's the way to go. With voice over IP, it gives you a lot of, you move that stuff out in the cloud and you get a lot more flexibility. But in my situation, I'm balancing the costs of upgrading versus migrating. Okay, so I need to upgrade the software and I need to change voicemail because I use ESNA, because when I went live with Mitel, the Mitel voiceover, the voicemail was not that good. Now they got a really good product, so I want to get rid of ESNA. I want to upgrade my voicemail. So that's going to cost me $25,000. Okay, which is I'm a small shop, so we're talking probably 80, 90 phones. Okay, if you look at it from a monthly cost, $550, $600 a month. Now, if I move it out to the Mitel MyCloud, I'm going to have to replace all my phones, because you have to have a certain model of phone for it to work with a hosted voice over IP. And my stuff is too old, so I have to replace all my phones. So, and that's going to cost me $3,500 a month. I mean, that's substantially more. $550 versus $3,500. But there are advantages to that. This would be all brand new stuff. The technology will never get stale because it's all done released. But that's a big number. I've only got one quote from one vendor though. I mean, I'm going to be obviously looking at other vendors, especially after I got this number. But I go to the boss and say, give him these two sets of numbers. I kind of know where the answer is going to be on this one. I mean, it's just. I'm going to have to do some really good tap dancing in order to convince him of the value of, what value does that additional cost going to bring to me.
Do you have to use Mitel phones?
Now that is a good question. I mean, I haven't really dived into it too deeply. I mean, if you got the same chipset, I mean, how did that come out? Yeah, anyway, so I mean, good question. Because apparently, I guess, in case you haven't heard, Mitel just bought ShoreTel. And apparently, ShoreTel has the same chipset as Mitel phones, so they're going to be able to just rebadge the ShoreTel. So, I mean, conceivably, yes, if they got the same chip, you could do that. But I mean, there's cost savings there. I haven't really looked at it.
I would ask if they could use Yealink phones, or Polycom tends to be pretty expensive too, but Yealink makes a good phone.
Yeah, I've used Yealink before. I got a Zolti system out in a small office, and it works really well. But I mean, the numbers come in, and obviously those numbers need to be worked. I mean, because they're not going to work like that. I mean, the boss will say, well, it's been working fine. We haven't had a problem in 8 years. Why do we need to upgrade? I mean, it will give us new features. We got some pretty crappy teleconferencing services that would help there, video conferencing. One of the things we're looking at, and I'm really working on, is we issue cell phones to a lot of staff. because they work with the public, and they don't want to use their personal phone because they don't want to give out their numbers. You can't expect them to do that, especially with some of the clientele that they work with. So we buy cell phones, you know, and there's money there. You know, it costs us a fair amount of money. What you can do on a lot of these, like Mitel, for instance, is, you know, you put a Mitel app on the phone. It's not, we're not talking about twinning. This actually is a Mitel app. It's got a DID number from our internal system. You can call out using that app. It uses the DID and goes through the Mitel system. So in effect, you have two phones in one. So that way we can get rid of the cell phones. And I got to work. I mean, that if I take the saving from the cell phones, you know, and subtract it out from that 3,500, then the numbers start working better. And this is kind of how you got to work some of this ROI, is look at the features that you're going to gain and what can you get rid of. So I'm looking at that, and we're paying for some teleconferencing stuff that we can probably get rid of. Then that number gets narrower. So if I can get that 3,500, you know, if I get a cheaper quote and I squeeze my savings, I can get that to the point where the boss might just say, you know, it would make sense to do it. But, you know, this is the kind of the dance you have to do. You got to be kind of creative here. I mean creative in a good sense, you know. I mean, not creative in like, that's a stretch the truth a little bit, because that never works. But you really got to look at the features and where you can eke out all these savings. And sometimes it may not be a savings, it may just be increased productivity, if you can measure that increased productivity. So, of course, if you're not doing any sort of benchmarking, then you can't, you know, how do you measure that? But that's a different conversation. So, anyway, disaster recovery, just real quick, because we're running out of time. One of the things I'm looking at is, you know, one thing a lot of people look at is, you know, using, if you don't have a site for disaster recovery, you can just replicate all your stuff up to a cold site in the cloud. I mean, it's just VMs in the cloud. It's not, the VM's not running, it's not active, but it's being updated. Then if your building burns down, then you go in through your management portal, you spin stuff up, you know, maybe you'll add more memory, whatever you need to do to make it a viable, you know, VM. And all of a sudden, you've got infrastructure that's running in the cloud. Because, you know, everything is metered. If it's just a cold site just being replicated, it's going to be a lot, you know, you're not incurring a lot of costs. The costs start rolling in when you activate the site, but at that point you're not really worried about costs because you're trying to, you know, do business. So and the other thing is what we're really looking at is, and this makes a lot of sense for local governments, is, you know, I mean, if I do a Hyper-V replication, all I need is a big server in somebody's server room and a good connection to it, and I can replicate all my VMs to it. But you need a good network for that. We're in the triad, and we're seeing a lot of activity, a lot of fiber, and we're getting to the point where it's going to be really viable. So I mean, that's a good option. A lot of governments do this already, but I mean, that's what we're probably looking at, is if I can find a good fiber connection to a local government, and then start replicating off-site, and then, you know, vice versa. That is something that I'm looking at. For small governments, it's hard to do that sort of stuff. We just don't have. If you're a county government, you can do a DR site because you've got multiple locations and you've got fiber everywhere, or a big city. But a small entity, it gets hard, and the only way we're gonna be able to do this in the small governments is just sharing resources, and the fiber is going to be the key to that. So, you know, I think we're getting there on the fiber.
Gary, as a regional council, do you all ever have like an aggregation service? So just thinking about like potential paths to the cloud for smaller local government?
We're doing that in our area. There's a project called TriGig, and we're facilitating that, but it's all local government, City of Greensboro, Winston-Salem. Part of that is using, like, for instance, City of Greensboro ran fiber to all their poles. I mean, Burlington's got, fiber. There's a 6-mile gap. How do you bridge that gap? I mean, so we got North State involved. I mean, it's a really interesting thing. You've got these islands of fiber. If you connect, run fiber, 6-7 miles, all of a sudden you've got a continuous network all the way across, from Winston-Salem to Burlington and down to High Point, that you can start, the government can use as a service. So that's something we're really actively involved in, and they're moving forward on it. So we're facilitating that. That came out of the NC, in the triangle they did NC Engine, which is kind of the same thing. This was like a phase 2 on that. So anyway, that's kind of it. I mean, that's my life and the cloud. I mean, it's my goal is I'm hoping to retire next year. And one of the things that I'm just trying to simplify things for the organization, because as a small shop, it's hard, I mean, as a 1 or 2 person shop, the more stuff that's out in the cloud for us, we still have, we have we can get to advanced technology, we just don't have the expertise to manage it. So that's something, it doesn't, we just can't do it. So for us, it makes sense to push as much out as you can. For a larger shop with all these, you're running all these different apps in-house, if you've got a robust network and a real large staff, it may not make sense to move some of this out to the cloud, especially when you start looking at the numbers. So, I mean, it's going to vary depending on the size, the complexity of your apps, so on and so forth. But anyway, any questions? If not, I'll thank you for putting up with me. I appreciate it. And I'm doing another one if you come back at 11. So.
What's that?
Well done, Gary.
All right. Well, the next one we're going to do. I love the HTTP stuff that I went live with.
Are you up to speed?
No, that is.
You're fishing.
No, that's. I've looked at it, and that's the next thing I've done. Because they're. Oh yes. Yeah, maybe time to turn around and see the features that I added.
Well, Sentinel, I mean, we're monitoring